The night was calm, almost eerily so, the kind of quiet that makes you think twice about breaking it with even the smallest sound. Laura Norris sat in the passenger seat of her friend Mia's car as they drove through the small Texas town where Mia had grown up. The headlights illuminated stretches of empty road lined with scrubby bushes and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. It was late, and the two women were tired after spending most of the day exploring nearby trails and catching up on old times. Laura leaned back against the seat, letting out a soft sigh. She hadn't been to Texas in years, and being here brought back memories of her childhood visits to this part of the country. Her father, Chuck Norris, had always loved coming to places like this, quiet towns where people seemed more connected to the land and each other. Though she didn't share his passion for rural life, Laura appreciated the simplicity of it all. For someone who spent most of her time in bustling cities, these moments felt refreshing. Mia glanced over at her friend with a warm smile. No, she said, her voice light and teasing. Your dad would probably love this place. Maybe we should bring him here sometime. Laura chuckled softly. Yeah, I can totally picture him sitting on a porch somewhere, sipping coffee while telling stories about roundhouse kicks and bad guys. They both laughed at the image, their voices filling the silence of the car. But the laughter faded quickly when red and blue lights suddenly flashed behind them. Startled, Mia checked her rearview mirror and then slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road. What's going on? Laura asked, turning around to look at the police car now parked behind them. I don't know, Mia replied, sounding confused. I wasn't speeding or anything. As the officer stepped out of his vehicle, Laura squinted to get a better look at him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the standard uniform of a local cop. His nameplate read, Harris. Something about the way he walked toward them made Laura uneasy. He moved with a deliberate slowness, as if trying to intimidate them before he even reached the window. When Officer Harris finally approached, he tapped on Mia's window with his flashlight. She rolled it down, offering him a polite smile. Is everything okay, officer? Did I do something wrong? Instead of answering right away, Harris shone the flashlight directly into the car, sweeping it over both women. His gaze lingered on Mia longer than necessary before moving to Laura. There was something cold in his expression, a hardness that sent a chill down Laura's spine. License and registration, he said gruffly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mia nodded and started digging through her purse for the documents. Laura watched as Harris leaned closer, resting one hand on the roof of the car. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied them. You girls aren't from around here, are you? He asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. No, sir, Mia replied, politely. We're just visiting. My family lives nearby. Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his attention fully to Laura. And what about you? What brings you to our little corner of the world? Laura forced herself to stay calm. I'm here with my friend. We're on vacation. Vacation, huh? Harris repeated, his lips curling into a faint smirk. Funny, I didn't think folks like you came to places like this for fun. Folks like you. The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Laura felt her stomach tighten. She knew exactly what he meant by that. Not just because she was an outsider, but because she looked different. With her blonde hair and blue eyes, she didn't fit into whatever stereotype Harris had formed in his mind. But Mia did, and the way he kept glancing at her made it clear he wasn't interested in being fair. Finally, Mia handed over the requested documents. Harris took them without saying thank you and stepped back to examine them under the light of his flashlight. Laura could see his jaw tightening as he read the names and addresses. When he saw Laura's last name, Norris, he paused, his eyebrows raising slightly. Well, he muttered almost to himself. Then louder, so you're one of those Norrises, huh? Bet Daddy Dearest taught you how to throw a punch or two. Laura blinked, unsure how to respond. Was he joking? Mocking her? She couldn't tell. Before she could say anything, Harris continued, his tone growing sharper. You know, we don't take kindly to strangers causing trouble around here, especially not ones who think they're too good for the rules. We weren't causing any trouble, Mia interjected, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. We were just driving home. Harris ignored her, focusing instead on, Laura, tell me, Miss Norris, does your famous father approve of you running around with people like this? He gestured vaguely toward Mia, his meaning unmistakable. Laura's hands clenched into fists in her lap. She wanted to snap back to defend herself and her friend, but she knew better than to provoke someone like Harris. Instead, she kept her voice calm and measured. My father raised me to treat everyone with respect, Officer Harris, something I'd expect from someone in your position as well. For a moment, Harris looked taken aback. Then his expression hardened again and he leaned down closer to the window. Respect is earned, sweetheart, not given freely. Now why don't you two step out of the car? Let's have a little chat. Mia exchanged a worried glance with Laura. Neither of them wanted to escalate the situation, but getting out of the car felt like walking into a trap. Still, they had no choice. Slowly, they opened their doors and stepped onto the roadside, the cool night air brushing against their skin. Harris circled them slowly, his flashlight still trained on them. You realize I could arrest you both right now, don't you? Resisting. Authority isn't something we tolerate around here. But we haven't done anything, Mia protested, her voice trembling slightly. And yet here we are. Harris shot back, his smirk returning. Maybe next time you'll think twice about coming to a place where you don't belong. Laura's heart pounded in her chest. She knew they were dealing with someone who thrived on power and control, someone who wouldn't hesitate to twist the truth to suit his agenda. But she also knew they couldn't fight him. Not here, not like this. So she swallowed her anger and spoke up again, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling inside her. If you want to arrest us, go ahead, but I guarantee you'll regret it once my father hears about this. Harris laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the stillness of the night. Oh, I'm shaking in my boots. Chuck Norris himself coming to save the day. Real scary stuff. But there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a brief moment where his bravado faltered. Laura noticed it, and she filed it away for later. Whatever happened next, she vowed to make sure Harris paid for his actions, not with violence, but with justice. As Harris cuffed them and led them to the back of his patrol car, Laura couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her and Mia anymore. It was about standing up to bullies like Harris and proving that no one was above accountability, not even those sworn to protect others. The ride to the police station was tense and silent. Laura sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her hands cuffed behind her, while Mia sat beside her, visibly shaken. Officer Harris didn't say a word during the drive, but his presence loomed, large. Every so often he glanced at them through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable but clearly smug. The flashing lights on the dashboard cast an eerie glow inside the car, making everything feel surreal. Laura tried to focus on staying calm. Her mind raced with thoughts about what they should do next. She knew her father would be furious if he found out how they were being treated, but she also knew it wasn't just about her anymore. This wasn't just some small-town cop flexing his authority. This was something bigger, a pattern of behavior that needed to stop. She glanced over at Mia, who looked pale and scared, and felt a surge of protectiveness. They had to get through this together. When they arrived at the station, Harris led them inside without explanation. The building was dimly lit, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A few officers sat at desks scattered around the room, typing on computers or talking quietly among themselves. No one seemed particularly surprised to see Harris bringing in two women in handcuffs. In fact, some barely glanced up from their work, as though this sort of thing happened all the time. Harris pushed open a door labeled Processing and ushered them into a small, sterile room. There was a metal table bolted to the floor, surrounded by chairs. He motioned for them to sit, then leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them like a predator sizing up its prey. So, he began, dragging out the word, "Let's talk about why you're here." Laura took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "We already told you we weren't doing anything wrong. You pulled us over for no reason." "No reason?" Harris repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I saw your plates, out of state, driving late at night, acting suspicious. That's plenty of reason. Mia shook her head. That's not fair. We weren't acting suspicious, we were just driving home. Fair? Harris scoffed. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. Maybe you should have thought about that before coming here. Laura clenched her jaw, refusing to let him bait her. Instead, she shifted slightly in her seat, subtly reaching for her phone in her pocket. It was still there, thank goodness. She hadn't used it since they'd been pulled over, fearing Harris might confiscate it. Now she knew she had to act fast. Quietly, she pressed the record button and slipped the phone back into her pocket, hoping it would pick up everything. That was said. Harris continued his tirade, pacing slowly around the room. You know, people like you think you can waltz into places like this and cause trouble. Disrespect our laws, disrespect our way of life. Well, let me tell you something. You're not welcome here. People like us? Laura asked, narrowing her eyes. What does that even mean? You know exactly what I mean, Harris snapped, stopping in front of her. Outsiders, people who don't belong. And what makes you the judge of who belongs and who doesn't? Laura shot back, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay calm. Before Harris could respond, another officer entered the room. He was younger, with a softer face and a hesitant demeanor. His badge read, Deputy Cole. He glanced between Harris and the two women, looking uncomfortable. Greg, he said cautiously, addressing Harris. Is everything okay here? Do you need any help? Harris waved him off dismissively. Everything's fine, Ryan. Just processing these two. Go back to your desk. Deputy Cole hesitated for a moment longer, glancing at Laura and Mia. There was something in his expression, sympathy maybe, or guilt. Whatever it was, it gave Laura a flicker of hope. Not everyone in this town was like Harris. Some people still had a conscience. Once Cole left the room, Harris turned his attention back to them. Now, where were we? Oh, right. You were telling me how unfair this all is. Laura decided to change tactics. If arguing wasn't going to work, maybe appealing to reason would. Look, Officer Harris, we understand you have a job to do, but arresting us for no reason isn't going to solve anything. It's only going to make things worse for everyone. Harris smirked, clearly amused by her attempt to negotiate. Oh, I'm not worried about making things worse. In fact, I think it's time you learned a lesson about respecting authority. With that, he uncuffed them and instructed them to stand. They followed his orders reluctantly, unsure of what was coming next. Harris led them down a narrow hallway to a holding cell where he locked them inside without another word. The cell was cold and bare, with concrete floors and walls painted a dull gray. A single bench ran along one side, offering the only place to sit. As soon as Harris walked away, Mia sank onto the bench, burying her face in her hands. This is insane, she whispered, her voice trembling. He can't just do this to us. Can he? Laura sat beside her, putting a comforting arm around her shoulders. He shouldn't be able to, she replied firmly. But he did. And that's why we have to fight back. Mia looked up at her, tears glistening in her eyes. How? What can we possibly do? Laura pulled out her phone, careful to keep it hidden from view in case Harris or someone else came back. We document everything, every word he says, every move he makes. Then we send it to my dad. Trust me, he'll know what to do. Mia nodded slowly, wiping her tears away. Okay. But what if they take your phone? They won't, Laura said confidently. Not unless they search us, and even then I'll find a way to get it to you. We stick together, Mia, no matter what happens. For the next hour they waited in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the station. The clatter of keyboards, the murmur of voices, the occasional slam of a door. Occasionally, Deputy Cole would walk past their cell, glancing in briefly, before moving on. Each time Laura caught his eye, silently pleading for him to intervene. But he never did. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Laura decided it was time to act. She opened her phone and quickly typed out a message to her father, attaching the audio recording she'd made earlier. The message was short and to the point. Dad, we need your help. Call me as soon as you get this. She hit send, praying the signal would go through. The station was in a remote area, and reception was spotty at best. But moments later, her phone buzzed with a notification. Her father had received the message. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As she tucked her phone back into her pocket, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Harris appeared again, this time flanked by two other officers. One of them carried a clipboard, while the other held a set of keys. "All right, ladies," Harris announced, unlocking the cell door. "Time to process you properly. Let's go." Laura and Mia exchanged a quick glance, silently agreeing to stay strong. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As they were led back to the processing room, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Harris might have underestimated them, but he had no idea who he was dealing with, and neither did anyone else. The sun had barely begun to rise when Chuck Norris stepped off the private jet onto the tarmac of a small airport just outside the Texas town where his daughter was being held. His face was calm, but there was a storm brewing behind his eyes, mix of anger, concern, and determination. Beside him walked Alan Brooks, his longtime friend and attorney, carrying a briefcase filled with documents and legal papers. The two men climbed into a waiting car without saying much, their focus sharp and unwavering. As they drove toward the police station, Chuck stared out the window at the quiet streets lined with modest homes and businesses. He had visited places like this before during his career as an actor and martial artist, often stopping to meet fans or participate in charity events. These towns were usually friendly and welcoming, full of people who appreciated hard work and honesty. But something about this one felt different, tense, almost hostile. Chuck didn't let it show on his face, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things here weren't as simple as they seemed. When they arrived at the station, reporters were already gathered outside, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. News of Laura's arrest had spread quickly, thanks to her last name and the recording she'd sent to her father. Word traveled fast in the age of social media, and by now, everyone knew that Chuck Norris's daughter had been pulled over and detained under questionable circumstances. Chuck ignored the commotion, stepping out of the car with Alan by his side. Together, they pushed through the crowd and entered the building, their presence immediately commanding attention. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Officers who had been chatting casually fell silent, their eyes wide as they recognized the legendary figure standing in their midst. Chuck didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He simply walked up to the front desk and asked to speak with Chief Daniels, the head of the department. Chief Daniels appeared moments later, looking flustered but trying to maintain composure. He was a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression, clearly not used to dealing with celebrities or fathers seeking justice for their children. "Mr. Norris," he said, extending a hand, "I'm sorry to hear about your daughter. Please come into my office." Chuck shook his hand firmly but didn't smile. "Thank you, Chief Daniels. I appreciate your time." They moved into the chief's office, a cramped space filled with filing cabinets and framed commendations on the walls. Alan set his briefcase down on the desk and opened it, pulling out copies of the audio recording and other evidence Laura had gathered. As he laid everything out, Chuck took a seat across from Daniels, his posture relaxed but his gaze intense. "I want to understand what happened here," Chuck began, his voice steady and measured. "My daughter and her friend were pulled over late last night and brought in on charges that don't seem justified. I've listened to the recording she sent me, and I believe Officer Harris crossed a line." Daniels sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Officer Harris is, well, he has a reputation for being tough, sometimes too tough, but he's also one of our most experienced officers. If he thought there was a reason to bring them in, I trust his judgment." "That's not good enough," Chuck replied, his tone firm but respectful. "You can't justify mistreating someone based on assumptions or prejudices. This isn't just about my daughter. It's about doing the right thing." Daniels nodded slowly, glancing at the papers Alan had placed on the desk. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Norris, and I assure you we'll look into this thoroughly. But these investigations take time. We have protocols to follow." Alan leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but authoritative. "We're not asking you to skip the process, Chief Daniels. We're asking you to ensure it's done fairly. From what we've heard so far, there are serious questions about Officer Harris's conduct. Ignoring those questions would reflect poorly on your department and on this town. Daniels hesitated, clearly torn between defending his officers and avoiding a public relations disaster. Finally, he nodded again. All right. I'll review the case personally and make sure it's handled properly. But I need you to give us some time. Chuck stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Time is fine, Chief Daniels. Just remember, justice delayed is justice denied. My daughter deserves better than this. With that, they left the office and headed back to the holding area to see Laura and Mia. When the two women saw Chuck walk in, relief washed over their faces. Laura rushed to hug him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Chuck hugged her tightly, his voice softening. It's okay, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. We're going to fix this together. Mia stepped forward nervously, unsure of how to act around such a famous figure. Chuck turned to her with a warm smile. Thank you for taking care of my daughter, Mia. I owe you one. Mia blushed, shaking her head. No, sir. She's the one who kept me calm. After a few minutes of reassurance, Chuck and Alan arranged for Laura and Mia to be released pending further investigation. They left the station quietly, avoiding the swarm of reporters outside. Back at the hotel where they were staying, Chuck sat down with the two women to discuss their next steps. We've got the evidence we need, Alan explained, opening his laptop to play the recording. This will be key in proving Harris acted improperly. But we also need Deputy Cole's testimony. He seemed uneasy about the whole situation, which means he might be willing to cooperate. Laura nodded thoughtfully. He did seem hesitant. Maybe he'll talk if we approach him the right way. Chuck agreed. Let's focus on getting his statement. In the meantime, I think it's time I paid Officer Harris a visit. Both women looked alarmed. Dad, no, Laura protested. You can't go after him alone. What if something happens? Chuck smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to have a conversation. One man to another. Sometimes actions speak louder than words. Despite their protests, Chuck insisted on following through with his plan. That evening, he drove to Harris's house, a modest home on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where kids played outside during the day and neighbors knew each other by name. Chuck parked his car and walked up to the front door, knocking firmly. A moment later, Harris answered, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw who was standing there. What the hell are you doing? Here? He demanded, his tone defensive. I came to talk, Chuck replied calmly. May I come in? Harris hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. After a long pause, he stepped aside, allowing Chuck to enter. The inside of the house was cluttered but clean, with family photos on the walls and a worn recliner in the corner. Harris gestured for Chuck to sit, though he remained standing himself. So, Harris said, crossing his arms. What do you want? I want to understand why you treated my daughter and her friend the way you did. Chuck replied, his voice steady. I've heard your side of the story, but I want to hear it directly from you, Harris scoffed. You already know why. They were outsiders causing trouble. People like that don't belong here. People like that? Chuck repeated, raising an eyebrow. What exactly does that mean? You know what it means, Harris snapped. They don't fit in, they don't respect our rules, and they sure as hell don't deserve special treatment because of who their daddy is. Chuck studied him carefully, noting the tension in his posture and the defensiveness in his tone. Respect goes both ways, Officer Harris. If you expect others to follow the law, you need to lead by example. What you did last night wasn't leadership, it was abuse of power. Harris bristled, taking a step closer. Are you threatening me, Norris? Chuck stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. No, I'm not threatening you. I'm reminding you that actions have consequences. Treat people with kindness and fairness, and they'll do the same for you. Treat them with cruelty and disrespect, and sooner or later, you'll reap what you sow. To drive his point home, Chuck moved suddenly, faster than Harris could react. In one fluid motion, he pinned Harris against the wall, his forearm pressing lightly against the officer's throat. Not enough to hurt, but enough to make him realize how easily he could be overpowered. Harris froze, his bravado crumbling as fear replaced it. "This isn't about revenge," Chuck said softly, releasing him. "It's about teaching you a lesson. Be better, Harris, or the next person who comes along might not be as forgiving." With that, Chuck turned and walked out of the house, leaving Harris shaken and speechless. The next morning, Officer Greg Harris sat alone at his kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His mind replayed the events of the previous night over and over again, the calm but commanding presence of Chuck Norris, the way he had been pinned effortlessly against the wall, and the chilling words that followed. For the first time in years, Harris felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Fear. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just shock. After all, Chuck Norris wasn't just any man, he was a legend. Anyone would be intimidated by someone like him. But deep down, Harris knew it wasn't just about Chuck's fame or physical prowess. It was about the truth behind what Chuck had said, that Harris's actions had consequences, and those consequences were catching up to him. As much as he wanted to ignore it, Harris couldn't deny the reality of his situation. The news media had already picked up the story, painting him as the villain in a tale of racial profiling and abuse of power. His colleagues at the station were avoiding eye contact with him, and even his neighbors seemed distant when he passed them on the street. Worst of all, Deputy Ryan Cole had started asking questions Harris didn't want to answer. At the police station, tensions were running high. Chief Daniels called an emergency meeting with the entire department, shutting the doors to keep reporters and curious onlookers out. He stood at the front of the room, his expression grim as he addressed his officers. "I won't sugarcoat this," he began, pacing slowly back and forth. "We're under scrutiny right now, and not just from the public. Internal Affairs is reviewing the incident involving Officer Harris, and I expect every one of you to cooperate fully. This isn't just about protecting our department, it's about doing what's right." Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. Some of his fellow officers looked sympathetic, while others seemed eager to distance themselves from him. Deputy Cole, sitting near the back of the room, avoided looking directly at Harris but kept glancing at him out of the corner of his eye. After the meeting ended, Cole approached Chief Daniels cautiously. "Sir, can I talk to you for a moment?" Daniels nodded, motioning for him to follow into his office. Once inside, Cole closed the door and hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking, maybe I should say something about what happened that night." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Cole explained, fidgeting with the hem of his uniform shirt. "I was there when Harris brought them in. I saw how he acted, with both Laura and Mia. It wasn't right, sir, and I think if I speak up it might help clear things up." Daniels studied him carefully, weighing his options. On one hand, having a witness come forward could save the department from further embarrassment. On the other hand, it meant admitting that one of their own had crossed a line. Finally, he sighed. "If you're sure about this, Ryan, then go ahead. Just remember, you'll need to testify if it comes to that." Cole nodded resolutely. "I understand, sir, and I'm ready." Meanwhile, Laura and Mia were adjusting to life outside the holding cell. With Alan Brooks handling the legal side of things, they focused on sharing their story with the world. They gave interviews to trusted journalists, describing their ordeal in detail and emphasizing the importance of accountability within law enforcement. Their voices resonated with many people across the country, sparking conversations about systemic racism and the need for reform. Chuck stayed close by, offering guidance and support whenever needed. He encouraged Laura and Mia to stay strong and reminded them that their courage could inspire change. "This isn't just about us anymore," he told them one evening. "It's about showing others that standing up for what's right is worth the fight." Back at Harris's house, the officer was struggling to come to terms with the growing backlash. His wife, Linda, confronted him after hearing rumors from her friends. "Greg, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "People are saying terrible things about you. Is any of it true?" Harris hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had always prided himself on being tough, on enforcing the rules no matter what. But now, faced with his wife's concern and the mounting evidence against him, he began to doubt his own actions. "I thought I was doing my job," he muttered finally, more to himself than to her. "But maybe I went too far." Linda placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. "It's not too late to make things right, Greg. If you did something wrong, you need to own up to it. For your sake, and for ours." Harris spent the rest of the day wrestling with his conscience. By the time evening rolled around, he made a decision. He drove to the police station and requested a private meeting with Chief Daniels. When they were alone in the chief's office, Harris took a deep breath and spoke. "Sir, I owe you an explanation," he began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "What happened with Laura Norris and her friend? I handled it badly. I let my biases get in the way, and I lost sight of why I became a cop in the first place. I'm sorry." Daniels listened silently, his face unreadable. When Harris finished, the chief leaned back in his chair and exhaled heavily. "Apologizing is a start, Greg, but apologies aren't enough. You need to take responsibility for your actions, not just to me, but to the people you hurt." Harris nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I will, sir. Whatever needs to happen, I'll do it." Word of Harris's confession spread quickly through the department. While some officers respected his honesty, others criticized him for admitting fault. Regardless, the internal investigation continued, with Deputy Cole providing key testimony that corroborated Laura and Mia's account of the events. As the days passed, the town began to heal in small ways. Conversations about race and policing became more open, with community leaders organizing forums to address these issues head-on. Chuck, Laura, and Mia attended several of these events, using their platform to advocate for meaningful change. For Harris, the road ahead was uncertain. He faced suspension pending the outcome of the investigation, and his reputation was tarnished beyond repair. But as he reflected on everything that had happened, he realized that sometimes harsh lessons were necessary for growth. Whether he liked it or not, he had learned something valuable. That true strength came not from dominating others, but from treating them with dignity and respect. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that lesson would stay with him forever. The weeks following the incident brought about changes that no one in the small Texas town could have predicted. Officer Greg Harris's suspension turned into a formal termination after the internal investigation concluded. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Laura and Mia's testimonies, the audio recording, Deputy Ryan Cole's confession, and even Harris's own admission of wrongdoing painted a clear picture of misconduct. Chief Daniels held a press conference to announce the decision, emphasizing the department's commitment to accountability and reform. "We failed," Daniels admitted during the conference, his voice heavy with regret. "And for that, I take full responsibility. Moving forward, we will implement new training programs focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation tactics. This is not just about fixing what went wrong, it's about ensuring it never happens again." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some residents applauded the chief's transparency and willingness to make changes, while others grumbled about outsiders stirring up trouble. Still, there was no denying that the town had been thrust into the national spotlight, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice and power. For Laura and Mia, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a harrowing experience. They spent their days traveling back and forth between interviews, community meetings, and private moments of reflection. Laura often found herself marveling at how much strength Mia had shown throughout everything. Despite the fear and anger she must have felt, Mia never wavered in her determination to stand up for what was right. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch of Mia's childhood home, Laura broke the silence. "Do you think things will really change here? Or are we just fooling ourselves?" Mia shrugged, sipping her iced tea. "I don't know. Change doesn't happen overnight. But if even one person starts thinking differently because of what we've done, then it's worth it." Laura smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, you know that?" Mia laughed softly. says the woman whose dad is Chuck Norris. They both chuckled, the tension easing slightly. It was moments like these that reminded them why their friendship had endured so many years and challenges. They balanced each other out, offering support when it mattered most. Back in California, Chuck Norris watched the news coverage with a mix of pride and caution. He was proud of Laura and Mia for handling themselves with grace and resilience, but he also knew that the fight for justice was far from over. The case had sparked important conversations, but those conversations needed to translate into action. To that end, Chuck partnered with civil rights organizations to launch initiatives aimed at improving police-community relations across the country. His involvement brought attention to the cause, inspiring others to join the movement. Meanwhile, Officer Harris struggled to adjust to life without his badge. Losing his job wasn't just a professional blow, it was a personal one. For years, being a cop had defined who he was, giving him a sense of purpose and authority. Without it, he felt lost, unsure of where he fit in anymore. His wife, Linda, tried her best to support him, encouraging him to seek counseling and find new ways to contribute to society. Slowly but surely, Harris began to see that redemption was possible, if he was willing to put in the work. One evening, Harris attended a community meeting hosted by local leaders and activists. The room was filled with people eager to discuss how to move forward, though tension still lingered beneath the surface. When it was his turn to speak, Harris stood nervously at the front of the room, his hands trembling as he gripped the microphone. "I'm not going to lie," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to be here tonight, facing all of you, facing myself. It's hard. But running away won't fix anything. So I'm standing here to say I'm sorry, not just to Laura and Mia, but to everyone I've hurt through my actions." He paused, glancing around the room. Some faces were skeptical, others curious, but none hostile. Taking a deep breath, he continued, "What I did was wrong, and I can't take it back. But I can try to make amends. I've started volunteering with organizations that focus on racial equality and education. It's a small step, but it's a start." When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't forgiveness, he knew that would take time, but it was acceptance. And for Harris, that was enough. Deputy Ryan Cole, on the other hand, emerged from the ordeal with a renewed sense of purpose. Coming forward had been difficult, but it taught him the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was scary. He became an advocate for transparency within the department, pushing for policies that encouraged officers to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. His efforts earned him respect among his peers and inspired others to follow his lead. As the months passed, the town began to heal. New programs were implemented at the police station, focusing on building trust between law enforcement and the community. Residents came together to organize events celebrating diversity and promoting unity. While scars remained, they served as reminders of the progress that had been made and the work that still needed to be done. Laura and Mia eventually returned to their respective homes, carrying with them lessons they would never forget. For Laura, it was the realization that privilege came with responsibility, the responsibility to use her voice to uplift those who weren't heard. For Mia, it was the understanding that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Chuck reflected on the entire ordeal with quiet satisfaction. He had always believed in leading by example, whether on screen or off. Now he saw firsthand how powerful it could be to stand up for justice, not with violence, but with integrity and compassion. As he sat on his porch one evening watching the sunset, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for his family, for the friends who supported them, and for the countless strangers who had joined the fight for a better world. In the end, the story of Officer Harris's encounter with Chuck Norris's daughter wasn't just about revenge or punishment. It was about accountability, growth, and the enduring hope that people could change if given the chance. And sometimes, that hope was enough to spark a transformation that reached far beyond what anyone could have imagined.